former Senior Vice President of Officiating of the NFL and current Fox Sports NFL and College Football Rules Analysis, Dean Blandino. Dean, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am doing terrific, buddy. Let me ask you, obviously, we're going through extreme times in the nation right now, and, obviously it's impacting the sports world in an unbelievable way. Let me ask you, from an NFL and college football perspective, rule changes do you think will have to be implemented in order for them to get the season underway this year?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think it's going to be a light year in terms of rules changes, just because of who knows when the seasons will start. Hopefully they start on time, but the off season obviously has been compressed, and usually you have more time and more interaction with your officials face to face to go through these rules changes. So I think it's going to be less rules changes overall, but for us to get back, I just think it comes down to the safety of everyone involved and the testing, and I think it's bigger than just football. It's going to have, obviously the safety of the general public is going to be a big part of this, and I know officials are still, they're still getting ready right now and doing Zoom calls and webinars and video conferences and just trying to prepare as best they can, and we'll see when we get back to normal.
Now, about a month ago, or maybe a couple of months ago, the XFL had started. I know you were heading up that with the officiating there. And, I actually watched a couple of games ago. I had just moved recently over to Arkansas, so when I was in Tampa, I'd watch a couple of the Vipers game. Looked like everything was going well. There was some decent fan engagement. And then about 30 days ago, roughly, the XFL folded. How shocked were you when you heard that?
Yeah, I was surprised in terms of the filing for bankruptcy. Obviously, with COVID-19 and sports just being put on hold around the world, the suspension of the season wasn't surprising. We knew that we weren't going to be able to continue to play games at that point, but to fold the league altogether, I was surprised. Everything was, like you said, everything was positive. The football, the quality of the play was really good. The production, I thought both ESPN and Fox Sports did a great job producing those games and presenting them. And I was confident. The people that I talked to were confident, even within the current environment, that we were going to have another season and go forward. And it just, ultimately, just these extraordinary circumstances were too much to overcome.
Now, Dean, we're talking live to Dean Blandino, former Senior Vice President of Officiating of the NFL and current Fox Sports NFL and College Football Rules Analyst. Dean, was there any specific rules in the XFL that you would suggest or would like to see implemented in the NFL?
Well, there were some interesting rules innovations in the XFL, and I thought the kickoff was probably the most well received, because I've been a part of the NFL for a long time, and we looked at the kickoff and the kick return and how to make that play a safer play, because it did have a higher rate of injury, especially head and neck injuries, and did that as well. I thought the XFL took a unique approach and really created a play that did reduce high-impact collisions, and it kept the return in the game. So I think as the NFL and certainly college football, as they continue to look at the kick return and how to make that safer, I think the XFL kickoff is definitely something they should consider. I liked the 3-point try. It made games. The 9-point game was no longer a 2-score game, and then the whole idea is to have closer games and more exciting finishes and have games decided by fewer points. So I like that as well, and I think both the college and the NFL rules committees will continue to look at those innovations.
Now, as far as our listeners go, Dean, and I don't think there's anybody that can explain it better than you, explain to those who are not familiar, who is in charge of making the NFL rules and how much say does a person that is the senior vice president of officiating have in the say of those rules?
Yeah, that's a great question. The NFL has a competition committee. It's made up of, it's a cross-section of coaches, general managers, a representation of ownership. And that cross-section is important because you get people who look at the game from a different perspective. If you had all coaches, you wouldn't have the perspective of a GM or an owner and vice versa. So they ultimately will review every year. They'll review statistical trends and injury data, things like that, and they'll propose certain rules changes based on what they see. If it's going to make a positive impact on the game. Now, the head of officiating is heavily involved in that process. That person doesn't have a vote. But they are going to be involved in the discussions. They are going to look at the potential rules changes from an officiating perspective. Can this rule change? Can this foul be officiated consistently? So when I was there, I did have a lot of input into that process. And then ultimately, any team could the rules change. And so if a club decided they wanted to propose, they certainly could do so. And then ultimately, a rule cannot be passed in the 75% of the membership. So 24 out of 32 clubs had to vote yes for a rules change to pass. And typically those votes are either going to be the owner or the owner's representative. And so that's really how the process works.
We're talking live to Dean Blandino on the Frankly Speaking Sports Hotline. Last year, speaking of rules, one was implemented last year on a trial basis, which was the pass interference replay. And, after a year of showing it, I believe very few, very, very few were actually overturned last year. Now they're doing away with it supposedly in 2020. Two questions for you. Number one is why? And number two, was it the players and coaches that decided to get rid of it, or was it actually the competition committee?
Yeah, so I think, obviously that was a significant rules change, and a lot of it had to do with the play from the 2018 NFC Championship game between the Saints and the Rams. I think that was probably the final straw. And I think we saw a lot of the unintended consequences with reviewing those subjective fouls. When replay went into the NFL, it was supposed to be to deal with things that were more objective, more facts. The ball touched the ground or the player's foot touched the sideline. When you start to get into pass interference, and it's not just was there contact, was the contact enough to restrict the receiver and those types of things. Now it's just subjective. And you're replacing one person's judgment, the official on the field, with another person's judgment, the person reviewing it. And I think we saw a lot of problems with it. Like you said, very few were overturned. The standard appeared to change throughout the season, and ultimately it was the competition committee that decided that they were not going to put that forth. It was only a one-year change, so they didn't have to re-propose it, and they ultimately decided, hey, it didn't work the way we thought it was going to work. We're not going to put it forth for another vote, and there was no club or coaches really weren't pushing for it, and so it's not. We won't have pass interference review for the upcoming season, which like I said, it's a combination of things. It's a difficult play to review, and I don't think it was implemented properly across the board last year.
Now, obviously we're in a different age where technology is probably at its finest. How much more pressure is there on officials today because of the technology, because of us being able to pretty much dissect every play from every different angle possible? I mean, these officials only have a split second to make a decision when you're live. So how much more pressure is on them now because of technology?
It continues to increase. I mean, I feel like now we're at a point where every season will be the most pressure, and it will continue to say, well, this season there's more pressure than ever, and the next season there'll be more pressure than this season because of the technology and the advances in technology. Look, you probably watched football like I did 30 years ago. You made the call on the field, and everybody moved on. There wasn't you didn't break it down and look at it from multiple angles and slow motion and high definition and all of those things. So the technology has raised the bar for the officials, and like you said, as technology has evolved, well, the on-field official hasn't evolved at the same pace. They're still looking at it from one view with their eyes, and they have to make a call in a split second. Whereas we get to look at it from multiple angles and slow motion and all these different advancements. So technology continues to put the officials under tremendous scrutiny. And it makes the job that much harder.
Now, Dean, in the past, for some reason, the definition of what a catch has become very, very difficult. And, I looked at replays. I remember watching a game a couple of years ago when Jenkins of the Jets, Stephen Jenkins, scored a touchdown, but he dropped the ball. And then the New England versus Pittsburgh game, the touchdown that wasn't. And according to the rule, the officials did get it right. But the rule, for anybody that you want to ask what the definition of a catch is, couldn't explain. Why did we have so much trouble defining what a catch was?
Well, I think, part of it was instant replay, and I think that whenever you look at something and you slow it down, a catch involves control. Did the receiver or the player, did he control the football, and that's subjective. And when you watch it in real time at full speed, sometimes it looks different than when you slow it down. And then there's an element of time. The receiver has to hold on to it. This has been in the rule book for 80 years. The receiver has to hold on to the ball long enough to do something with it. Now that is very subjective, and I think a lot of people struggled with that. I think the application of the rule wasn't always consistent, and I was a part of that. It's a difficult call to make on the field, and sometimes it's difficult to apply that rule in replay. And I think there's always going to be some debate over catch, no catch because of that subjectivity. It's tough to say, well, you know it when you see it, because then it's tough to teach that. It's tough to create greater consistency. You have to have some rules in place, and I just think that was a rule, and it continues to be a rule that we'll continue to debate because there is a lot of subjectivity to it.
Now, Dean, a couple more questions before we let you run here. What are your thoughts in the NFL with ties?
So I'm not opposed to ties. I think we didn't have overtime. In the history of the NFL, there was a time when there was ties. College football as well. And to me, there's pros and cons. I don't think we'd ever go back and eliminate overtime altogether. And people ultimately, especially today, they want that satisfaction. There was a winner or a loser. A tie kind of leaves you with a little bit of a bitter taste. But I think with taking away overtime, it would put pressure on both teams to try to win the game in regulation. It might create more exciting finishes where teams might get conservative, knowing we're going to go to overtime. So I'm not opposed to ties. I think ties sometimes are good for the standings, and they can create tiebreakers at the end of the year, natural tiebreakers. But I don't think we'll ever go back and get rid of overtime altogether. I think it's too ingrained in the game right now.
Now let me ask you this. I'll put you a little bit on the spot here. Who's your refs that you are in charge of, and the officials, however you want to word it? Who is the one team or the one player or the one coach that your officials seems to, when they look at their schedule and they know they have that game, they tend to, a little bit to cringe a little bit, that they're like, oh, that's a really tough game because they have to deal with that specific coach or player?
most in my time, at least from my experience, almost all of the coaches I dealt with were great, and it's a tough environment. It really is. It's emotional for them, and their jobs are on the line, and officiating is something they can't control. And coaches like to control everything, and there's a lot of structure within the NFL, and so for the most part, the coaches have been great. I would say, one guy that stands out, and he's just, I don't know if officials cringe, but they knew you knew what you were going to get with him, and that was Bruce Arians. And BA is a guy, we have a great relationship, but he's a guy that'll tell you how he feels. He's not going to hold back. And so you were going to hear it on the sideline if you have one of his games, if you're on his sideline. But he's also the type of guy that he might vent and he might let you have it, and then maybe 10 minutes later, he's going to smack you on the back and kind of pick you up again. So I know you were definitely in for an earful if you have Bruce on your sideline when you're officiating the game.
Now, before we let you run here, Dean, I have to ask you the $1 million question that everybody wants to know. Based on what you know now, both college and NFL, will there be a season?
I do believe that there will be a season. I think it's going to be more of a challenge for the colleges. I think just because the NFL is under one umbrella, they're professional athletes. You're not dealing with student athletes. You're not dealing with universities getting kids back on campus. And you also have across the board with the NCAA, you have different conferences, you have different levels, you have different resources. Difficult. I can't envision a scenario right now today, knowing what I know today, where college football starts in September. Full stadium, everybody's playing. I just can't. I think there's too many challenges, but I do think there will be a college football season. It'll look different, and I do think there will be an NFL season. I think the NFL has a greater chance to look more like what we're used to, but I still, knowing what I know right now, I can't imagine the NFL season starting with 80,000 people in each stadium. I think there's going to be maybe less or no fans. But I do think we're going to have. I don't know for sure, but I do think we're going to have a football season.
Well, Dean, I want to thank you so much for joining